At the boardroom of Neural Nest, my name was whispered with urgency. He won't sign unless Jordan Blake S. in the room. I looked out the glass wall. My parents, proud, polished, perfectly unaware, stood waiting beside Harlan Voss, the billionaire investor they'd chased for a decade. I took a sip of black coffee, straightened my jacket, and said, "Let them in, but don't tell them who I am." Because today, they weren't meeting their daughter. They were meeting the architect of the system they didn't believe in. My name is Jordan Blake, and I was never supposed to be the one. Not in a family like mine. Growing up in Dallas felt like auditioning for a role I didn't want. My father, Thomas Blake, was a real estate mogul who quoted Sun Tzu and Forbes in the same breath. My mother, Diana, wore high heels even at breakfast and believed crying was a form of weakness best trained out before high school. Their business, Blake Heritage Realty, wasn't just a company. It was a dynasty. And I was the crack in the foundation. While other kids were learning the art of the sale, I was obsessed with patterns, clicks, scrolls, eye-tracking, behavior loops. While my cousins shadowed brokers, I coded my first emotional prediction engine in junior year of high school. "You're wasting your brain on noise," my father once said. And when I got a full ride to Princeton in computational cognition, he muttered, "Let me know when they offer a major in fantasy." They wanted a protege. I became a ghost. Seen only in holiday cards, tolerated at family events, and never invited to business meetings. Until one Tuesday morning in May 2031, when the same parents who called me an algorithm addict walked into my building. Not for me, but for the deal, and they had no idea I was the one holding the pen. It started with a ping on my screen. Subject line, "Urgent, potential collaboration, Blake Heritage Realty." At first, I thought it was a prank. Then I opened the body of the message. "We're assisting Mr. Harlan Voss on an adaptive real estate model in the posted market. He specifically requested Neural Nest's behavioral interface team, particularly your JB lead. Are they available for a consultation this week?" I stared at the screen. My parents, begging for a meeting, because their white whale, the elusive billionaire who could triple their valuation overnight, refused to finalize anything unless my system backed it. Irony has good timing. Apparently, the embarrassment to the Blake brand was now the only key to unlocking their biggest deal. I didn't reply. I walked down the hall to operations. "Move my 3 p.m. Thursday," I told my assistant. "Why?" she asked. "Because," I said, "my parents are about to walk into a boardroom they don't know I own." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the city skyline, half dreading, half relishing the moment. Would they recognize me? Would they pretend nothing ever happened? Would they try to spin it? The truth is, I didn't know what I wanted from them. An apology, acknowledgement, revenge. No, I wanted them to see me, not the girl they dismissed. Not the resume they mocked, but the strategist who turned digital chaos into a billion-dollar framework. The next morning, I dressed deliberately. No makeup, no jewelry. Just a charcoal gray blazer, a steel pen, and the calm of someone who had nothing left to prove. 10:58 a.m. My office overlooked the lobby, frosted glass with a clean silver etching. Jordan Blake, Behavioral Systems Director. But unless you knew what that meant, you'd never know who sat inside. Through the haze of the glass, I could see 3 silhouettes enter the lounge. 2 were unmistakable. My father, broad-shouldered, stiff posture, tailored navy suit from his signature Dallas tailor. My mother, heels clicking like gunfire, lips pressed into a permanent smile that never reached her eyes. And behind them, Harlan Voss, tall, composed, dressed in casual luxury like a man too wealthy to care about appearances but smart enough to master them anyway. My assistant Sarah buzzed in. "They're here. They're early." "Of course they are," I said, standing. "Take them to the glass lounge. Offer coffee, but don't announce me yet." "Are you sure?" I smiled. They wouldn't recognize me anyway. From my vantage point above the lounge, I watched it unfold like a scene in a play. My mother paced. My father scrolled. Mr. Voss, he looked curious, calm, and slightly amused. I watched her say something, probably complaining about the delay. I imagined her voice. We were told someone named JB would meet us. Probably one of those tech kids who don't even shake hands properly. I took a breath, grabbed the touchpad, and walked out of my office. I descended the stairs slowly, deliberately, not rushed, not timid. As I reached the door, I caught my reflection in the mirrored trim. Still, silent, unshaken, I opened the door, and time stopped. My mother looked up first. Her smile froze mid-sentence. My father stood, Mr. Voss. He leaned back in his seat and smiled, like he'd been waiting for this moment. "Jordan Blake," he said warmly, extending his hand. "I've heard quite a lot about you, from your system mostly." I took his hand and replied without looking at my parents. "Then it's time to hear the rest. Welcome to Neural Nest." Silence. That thick, strained kind of silence where no one knows how to breathe properly. My mother's lips parted, but no words came out. My father's jaw clenched, as if trying to grind the moment into something he could understand. And me, I sat down, calm, measured, unbothered, because this wasn't their boardroom, it was mine. "Let's begin," I said, opening the projection screen. "Mr. Voss, what you're asking for isn't just possible, it's overdue." I started the pitch. Projected on the screen was the system I'd spent 5 years building. Not just market analytics, behavioral micromapping, purchase trajectory curves based on emotion-tagged browsing. It was elegant, fast, indisputable. I watched Harlan Voss nod, fascinated. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw my father shift, lean forward, realizing too late that he was out of his league. Then came the interruption. "Jordan," my mother said, her voice strained sweet. "Why didn't you ever tell us you were working with Neural Nest?" I didn't look at her. "You never asked. You just assumed I was experimenting with useless code." My father tried to recover. "You could have joined the family firm. Your tools, if integrated, could have helped us expand." I turned, finally meeting his gaze. "When I offered you a behavioral overlay system 4 years ago, you said clients don't care about brain math. When I brought up AI-guided pricing, you said, no real man needs an algorithm to close a deal. And when I got hired here, you told Aunt Carol I was playing office in a Silicon Valley dollhouse." "Mr." Voss chuckled softly at that, not mockingly, just entertained. "I have to say," he said, folding his hands, "I find this all rather refreshing. I've worked with legacy firms before, but none of them had the foresight to create what you've built, Jordan." My mother tried to pivot. "We always knew Jordan had something special. That's why we encouraged her to explore." I cut in, clear and sharp. "You didn't encourage me. You erased me. Every dinner, every conference, every family photo where I was the only one not invited to the stage. You wanted obedience, not innovation." Mr. Voss glanced at my slides again, then looked at me. "So what would integration look like without them?" My mother's eyes went wide. My father leaned forward. "Wait, hold on. We brought you this client." "And I brought the platform he's actually investing in," I said flatly. The room was still. No air moved. Even the projector seemed quieter. Then Harlan Voss leaned back in his chair and said the one sentence that detonated everything. "I want Neural Nest to take over the full behavioral operations pipeline for my real estate portfolio. All of it, and I want you, Jordan, to lead it." The implication was clear. He wasn't asking for my parents' firm. He was asking for me, exclusively. My mother blinked fast, scrambling for control. "That's wonderful, of course, but this should be a collaborative opportunity. Jordan, you could bring this through our firm. Blake Heritage has the infrastructure, the name, the resistance," I interrupted. "You spent years resisting everything I tried to build. Now that it's profitable, you want to white label it." My father stood, voice tight. We built our company from dirt. You can't cut us out of a deal we initiated. I stood too. Slowly. I'm not cutting you out. Mr. Voss asked me for a solution, and I'm offering it with or without family packaging. Mr. Voss raised an eyebrow. Would your system work better without legacy friction? He knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't just testing the tech. He was testing me. I met his gaze, steady. Yes, faster onboarding, no bureaucracy, and no boardroom politics rooted in ego. My father scoffed. You're choosing pride over family. I replied without hesitation. No, I'm choosing function over dysfunction. Then Harlan made it official. In that case, he said, I'd like to move forward with Neural Nest exclusively. Jordan, prepare a transition plan. We'll begin with the Austin pilot next quarter. He extended his hand again. This time, not as a guest, but as a partner, I shook it. And just like that, the room shifted. I was no longer the shadow of the Blake legacy. I was the architect of my own. The meeting ended, papers signed, hands shaken. Harlan left the room first, nodding at me like we'd just closed a chess match in 2 moves. My parents didn't move. They just sat there, still dressed for war but stripped of armor. My father's hands were clasped too tightly. My mother stared at the untouched glass of water like it might explain something. I packed my laptop in silence, and then quietly my father spoke. You were always this sharp. I didn't look up. You were always this blind. He winced, not dramatically, just enough. My mother reached for something, maybe an excuse, maybe my hand, but I stepped back. You didn't lose the deal today, I said. You lost the illusion that I needed you to become something. She exhaled. We were scared. Of what we didn't understand. And instead of asking, I replied, you diminished it, you diminished me. She looked up then. So what happens now? I paused, then reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, one I'd prepared weeks ago, just in case this day ever came. This is an operations proposal. Neural Nest is expanding. I need satellite teams in 6 markets. If Blake Heritage wants to bid for one of them, on merit, they can. But the evaluation will be blind. You'll be assigned a number, not a name. No favoritism. My father stared at the folder, didn't reach for it, didn't refuse it either. That's fair, he said finally. Cold, but fair. No, I corrected. It's respectful for once. Then I turned and left the room. That night I didn't go out to celebrate. No champagne, no posts, no victory dance. I just sat at my window, watching the Austin skyline glow against a darkening sky. For the first time in years, I felt. Not vindicated, not superior, just free. The next morning, a small package arrived at my office. No card, no signature, just a worn leather-bound notebook. Inside was a page torn from one of my childhood sketchbooks, one I thought they'd thrown out years ago. At the bottom, scribbled in shaky ink, was a single line. Maybe we didn't raise the next Blake CEO, but we might have raised something better. I didn't cry, didn't call. I just placed the notebook on the shelf between founders at 50 and system thinking for real-world impact, and I got back to work. Because I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I wasn't trying to belong. I was building something new, not in their name, but in mine. Jordan Blake, not the family's legacy, the architect of my own.